This week on Dig Me Out, 80s metal. With your hosts, Jason Ziak, Tim Minichi, and Chip Midnight.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Dig Me Out 80s Metal. Join us at Patreon to become a member of the Metal Union at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. And gentlemen, we're back with another poll episode submitted to us by the listeners.
The people have spoken again.
People spoke.
I want to get into this one. It was a little surprising.
Yeah, well, this had no, like, any one of these could have taken it. This was not there were no outsiders on this one. These are all bands that if you were familiar with the 80s metal scene, any one of these would have been perfectly fine with you. So here's what we had who they suggested in the albums. So Eric Peterson suggested Gretchen Goes to Nebraska by King's X. Richard Waterman suggested the self-titled album by LA Guns. Kyle Bittner suggested the self-titled album by Wasp. And Patrick Testa suggested Midnight Dynamite by Kix. All bands I know the name of and have heard at least one song.
Nice. So when I pulled these out of the hopper, I'm thinking the obvious choices are LA Guns and Wasp, right? Like LA Guns is like, I don't know, for me, one of the bands that pops to mind when this whole genre is brought up. And then, I mean, what's more 80s metal than Wasp? I mean, they legit metal and got the hooks and the image and
Terrified
Kix
Parents.
Is the Midnight Dynamite is a bit of an underdog record for Kix. Probably would do the album after this, but I could see it going that way. But that's not what happened, Tim. What happened?
You want me to tell you? I think what happened is you're right. LA Guns and Wasp were the two, and they split the vote because King's X won with 37% of the vote. LA Guns had 32, Wasp had 26. Kix was dead last, 5%. So I think it's happened is LA Guns and Wasp, those were the two big names, and that's what people went for. I think if somebody had, if they had all coalesced behind like LA Guns, it would have gotten 50% of the vote. But
so here's a question for the two of you over the 700 episodes. Do you guys vote?
Yes, sometimes.
Did you vote?
We have
one?
One vote in our admin account. Sometimes we will use it and sometimes we will not, depending on how close things are.
No.
No, it doesn't look like we did.
There's no vote for this one. So
I would have voted for Wasp personally, just because it just feels like a band that we have to do soon.
Yeah. I voted
even
for
though I love
Guns.
LA Guns.
Yeah. That's what I voted for.
Yeah. Now, to be fair, King's X is very popular in our community. And I mean, we did Dogman, and did we do Ear Candy too on the 90s podcast?
No, we've only done Ear Candy.
Okay.
We didn't do Dogman.
So we even have a channel for King's X in our Discord. So now more, after I thought about it, I was like, okay, well, this is, a super popular band that cuts across, our audience. So it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Just to let you know, we have a King's X channel and no Nirvana channel. In case you're wondering.
What the 90s podcast is talking about.
And just today, I added an Alice in Chains channel, and we'll get into why in a little bit. But yeah, we haven't been good about creating channels for the biggest bands. We just put them in for like the bands that everybody likes to talk about, and then we're like, okay, we should probably move it to its own channel. Like it's eating up the listening booth channel or some other channel.
There's not a lot of chatter about Nirvana. I don't know what else can you say.
They got nice t-shirts.
Surprisingly, there's a lot of chatter in the Sponge channel.
Yeah. Oh, Sponge was off the hook with their Record Store Day release, which, by the way, I actually ended up listening to that record and like half of it. But I did end up enjoying it. But I think I understand why it didn't go over well with, I guess.
I haven't listened to it yet. Is it not? I assumed it was going to be pretty much like Pop Sunday. Is it not?
No.
Oh, okay.
I think there's some different songs and different arrangements. And like, I think they completely re-recorded for Pop Sunday.
Okay.
I'm sure there's some sponge heads out there that will
Sponge heads.
Get the exact information out. Is that that's what their fans are called, right? Sponge heads.
We should really know this, but
Squeegees.
SpongeBob's.
So let me ask you guys, what's your familiarity with King's X? King's X, was this a band that you were listening to as the records come out or came out back in the 80s and then in the 90s, or was this a band that you got into later?
I remember Over My Head being pretty big. I think I even heard it on the radio. A bit of context, growing up in Cleveland, most of the bands we're going to talk about were not on Cleveland radio for whatever reason. They were more 70s rock and got into like 90s stuff, but most of the 80s they ignored all of these bands except for King's X. They did play Over My Head. I remember a little bit, may have been like a weekend show in the evening, and I didn't really seriously get into them to maybe a year or two later. And I got the self-titled and Faith, Hope, and Love, and then I got super into them with Dogman and Ear Candy and through the night. So they were a pretty big band for me, especially in the 90s. Not necessarily this album though. How about you, Chip?
Yeah, I was a dedicated Headbangers Ball watcher and videotaper. And videotaping was, I mean, it was awesome to watch it live, but it was even better to watch it on video so you could fast forward through the commercials. Headbangers Ball, the old MTV heavy metal show that I don't know when it started, probably late 80s and went through, I think it probably went a lot longer than I think it did. Probably lasted longer than I watched it, but they had a video for Shot of Love off the first album, which there's a lot of bands that do this, but the first album was called Out of the Silent Planet.
Yeah.
But there was no song on the first album called Out of the Silent Planet, but there was a song called Out of the Silent Planet on the second record. But
It's
yeah,
so confusing.
I actually have the cassette sitting over my shoulder. I have Out of the Silent Planet, Gretchen Goes to Nebraska, and the self-titled, and then I have the CD of Faith, Hope, and Love and Dog Man. And I think I bought a record store day at Used Kids in Columbus. They typically put the stuff that didn't sell like the year before out in the bins during record store day, like a year and a half later, and I was able to pick up. I honestly don't even know what King's X albums I picked up, but I picked up 2 albums for like $5 each. But going back to the question, yeah, I knew about Shot of Love, but I did not buy the cassette at that time. But Over My Head was sort of the big, huge hit, and I became a fan and bought that cassette. And then I think I saw them live for the first time on the Faith, Hope, and Love tour in Columbus once I started going to college. So yeah, I'm very familiar with them. Seen them a lot back in those days, and then I saw them just a couple years ago, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, so I was definitely familiar with them and owned stuff by them.
I've never seen them live.
Well,
Tim, have you ever seen them live?
No, and the only previous experience I had with them was reviewing Ear Candy for the podcast, their 1996 album. We reviewed it for Dig Me Out a long time ago, probably like season 3 or 4. And I don't think they didn't fully endear themselves to me then. I think I was a little lukewarm on the record. So we'll see how this goes. But
I can't believe we haven't done Dog Man. That's the most 90s album they did. I mean, Ear Candy I love that album too, but
I feel like Dogman's been in some polls though.
Yeah, You're right. I think that's why keep thinking we did it.
So I'm going to share some basic history, and then you guys can fill in if I'm missing stuff that you know.
History of the band.
So they formed in Springfield, Missouri in 1979 as they were called The Edge. And then they changed their name to Sneak Preview after that. And they actually released an album in 1983 as Sneak Preview, and then changed their name to King's X in 1985. They've basically been the lineup of Doug Pinnick, Jerry Gaskill, and Ty Tabor from almost the entire run of the band. I think that there's been like maybe some people, I think Dan McCullum and Kirk Henderson were there at the very beginning, but they were not, by the time they were King's X, they were not in the band anymore. So it's 40 years of them, these 3 guys. And to be fair, they do a lot of stuff outside the band. Like Doug Pinnick is in like 20 other bands with various people. And Ty Tabor has like a ton of solo albums and solo projects and stuff. So they, as mentioned, they were from Missouri. They signed to, what was the label that they signed to originally for Out of the Silent Planet? Megaforce, the legendary Megaforce Records, run by Zazulas, John and Marcia Zazula, which I think if you watch any documentary about metals bands in the 80s, Megaforce comes up in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Is that who Eddie Trunk worked for?
Yes. I think so.
Yeah.
And weren't they the ones that like booked Metallica on the East Coast and that kind of thing? And
yes,
like they were like a huge part of all that. So the debut album comes out March of 1988.
Tim, real quick though, but they moved from Missouri to Houston, Texas.
Oh, okay.
So
thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, I think they moved. It was either because a label was interested in them or a management company. There was somebody that had interest in the band. They were headquartered there, and they were like, "Hey, you should come down here. There's a happening scene down here. You guys should move down here." So they moved down there, and then that's when they ended up whatever that management or label was. They ended up actually not even working with them and signing with Megaforce. But until the internet, like I just assumed they were a Houston band. Like I didn't know about the Missouri stuff because that stuff was not, they weren't signed, and there was nothing, they didn't talk about that a whole lot in the press. I think they were well known for being a Houston band at that time.
So at the time on Megaforce were bands like Anthrax, Testament, Overkill. So they go out on tour with these bands, which I'm trying to imagine them like being the opening band for Testament or Anthrax, and it doesn't seem like a correct pairing. But then they also toured with bands like Cheap Trick, Blue Oyster Cult, and Robert Plant, which is interesting. Robert Plant in the 80s. So that album went to number 144 in the Billboard album chart. And then in 1989, they released the album we're going to talk about, Gretchen Goes to Nebraska. And again, they had some interesting touring partners. Again, they went out with Anthrax. They also toured with Suicidal Tendencies, Living Color, Blue Murder, and Billy Squier.
Nice.
I didn't even know Billy Squier was still a thing in 1989. But
I don't remember that era of him either.
I don't know if he was still loving every minute of it at that point. I feel like they could have been over.
When I wrote for the Ohio State paper, I needed one article to complete my assigned, like you had to do, I don't know what it was, the assigned 10 articles or 15 articles per quarter when you were a news writer. And I was down I needed one more to pass the class. And so I did a Billy Squier concert review in probably 1991. And the Lantern, being the reputable newspaper and teaching newspaper, you had to get quotes. So I had to like stand around, and I couldn't talk to Billy Squier, so I stood around back and waited for them to come out. And as they were waiting, I interviewed like Steve Jones, concert goer, said this was the coolest show I've ever seen. Like I got my 2 quotes in, so I completed the assignment. So Billy Squier was definitely around in 1991 because he helped me complete my class.
Okay, how about
Thanks,
that?
Thanks, Mr. Squier.
Yeah, but King's X did not open that show.
Okay, their third album, Faith, Hope, and Love, came out in late 1990. It was the first album of theirs to crack the top 100, based on the single "It's Love." They also, this is a really odd thing. So there's a song on there called "We Were Born to Be Loved," which apparently Paul Schaefer really liked. He was part of the CBS orchestra for David Letterman. So they would play that as the bumper music, like live. Like they did their version of it when they would go to commercial. So if you were listening to David Letterman in 1990, you were hearing King's X in and out of commercials.
The Late Show encourages you to help disaster relief efforts. Visit Doctors Without Borders at www.doctorswithoutborders.org and make a donation. Thank you.
They also toured, this time with Iron Maiden in Europe and AC/DC on the Razor's Edge tour in US and Europe. And then they also had a song in the Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey soundtrack. Then they moved up from Megaforce up to the parent label Atlantic for their 4th album, the self-titled, in 1992. And apparently there were some interband issues at that time. So there were some of the styles that they chose did not go over well with the public, and they didn't hit the top 100 again. And this is also when you start to see, grunge is starting to take effect. So the radio is changing as far as you mentioned, Jay, earlier about hearing them on the radio in Cleveland. What's interesting is that Pearl Jam's Jeff Ament is a big fan of King's X. He said King's X invented grunge.
Yeah.
And I'm going to take I don't think so, Jeff. I don't know what you know, but I don't think so.
He did a project with Doug.
Oh,
Three Kings or something, or I don't know. They had an album.
There was a Three Fishes album.
Oh, was it the Three Fish album? Is Doug Panic on that? I didn't know that. Well, they ended up stealing the producer because Brendan O'Brien produced Dogman, who had previously worked with Stone Temple Pilots and Pearl Jam. They went and they were on Woodstock 94. They opened for Pearl Jam in 94. And then they opened for Pearl Jam, Scorpions, Motley Crue, and Typo Negative that year. That's an interesting assortment of bands to tour for. I guess it's Karabi. Is that Karabi, Motley Crue too in 94?
Yeah.
Wow.
The project was called Trace Mountains.
Oh, okay. That's different.
TRES, MTS.
Three Fish.
Jeff Ament and Doug Pinnick.
Third album for Atlantic, Ear Candy, came out in 96, what we previously mentioned. Then in 98, they left Atlantic and moved to Metal Blade Records. So they hit the two most important metal band labels, Megaforce and Metal Blade. If they get to like Frontiers at some point, that's probably the triumvirate of metal labels. They released Tapehead in 1998 for Metal Blade, and then followed that up in 2000 with Come Home, Please Come Home, Mr. Bulbous. Fun fact, that's the only King's X album I own on vinyl. I got it because it was $5 at Used Kids. It was a record store day release, but it's warped, so I can't play it.
Wow.
That might be one of the ones that I got at Used Kids for $5.
Is it? Did you open it? Is it warped?
I did. I was like, I had to buy it for $5, but it's still.
That's
wrapped.
how I felt. I was like, oh, I know this band. I'm going to buy it. It's $5, brand new. It's in the wrap. And then I took it out and I go, this is horribly warped. It can't even play the first track. It's so badly warped. So there you go. Manic Moonlight followed in September of 2001. That's a bad time to put out an album. Sorry, guys. That was for Metal Blade. Followed that up in May of 2003 with Black Like Sunday. Ogre Tones came out in 2005 on the label Inside Out. That was produced by Michael Wagner, who I believe we've talked about before.
He did Dog Eat Dog by Warrant.
He did Dog Eat Dog. That's right. And then
he will come up a lot on this podcast.
Yeah,
he did a lot of albums in the 80s.
Yeah.
XV, or is that 15? Supposed to be 15?
I think it's 15.
That's their 15th album. That came out in 2008 on Inside Out. And then there was a big break, kind of the longest break in the history of the band, 16 years or 14 years. And in 2022, they released Three Sides of One, also on Inside Out. And I'm not even going to get into all the side projects and stuff because there's a ton. But they've also put out a number of live albums. There's been some compilation albums, DVDs. And in fact, one of the DVDs, Gretchen Goes to London, which is a concert performance of this album, was released in 2008. It was shot by a fan on a camcorder. And I guess the footage was so good, they were like, let's release it as a DVD. And that's what ended up happening. So if you have a camcorder video of one of your favorite bands sitting at home, you might want to take a look at that and see how the quality is, because they might want to put it out. Anything that I missed there that I should have mentioned with regards to King's X? So
I don't know if you guys are going to get into this in what you talk about, like likes and dislikes. And if you are, we can hold it. But they had sort of a vaguely Christian angle to them.
Right.
They were involved in sort of a Christian music scene. They, like the early Missouri days, they backed some different artists. They backed somebody from the band Petra, who was putting out a solo record, and they were like helping sing backing vocals and maybe even playing with that guy. But they were never, they weren't Striper, right? They didn't probably, I don't know. You could debate that, probably for the better, not taking that angle. And they've said in the press that they were all Christian, but the music was the music, and that they were not trying to be a Christian band, but that they did have Christian beliefs. I know, I don't remember what year I read it somewhere, maybe the late 90s. They sort of stepped away from that a little bit, because Doug Pinnick is gay, and thought that he wasn't being supported in his community, thought that his values and the Christian values weren't always aligning. And so he kind of took a step back. And I think the rest of the guys did as well. They were sort of like, our values don't exactly match what we grew up believing in. So they've never played, again, they've never played the striper card and been a Christian band.
Right.
But, the records were sold for a while in Christian music stores and bookstores. And so there was, there was a loose affiliation.
Yeah, it's mentioned on their Wikipedia page that part of it was because that first album that they put out, is Sneak Peek, was on a Christian label.
Yeah.
And obviously since then, all have just been on what you would call mainstream, I guess, labels. So it hasn't come up since then. But
when you think when they started, right? Like even when King's X started, the late 80s, Doug Pinnick is a African-American, Mohawked, gay man. I don't know that I knew that he was gay for, I don't, during that period. And I'm not sure that he probably even said anything at that time period. I'm not sure that it would have been, in fact, I think it might've been in that Wikipedia. It might've been somewhere else that, I think that he was basically told like by somebody, a label or manager, to not really mention that, if anybody asks you, sort of brush it off and move on to the next question. So I think at that time it would not have been very well accepted in that world.
I remember hearing the Christian stuff pretty early on with this band, like just the mentions of it.
Yeah.
And then I remember listening to the music and thinking, I don't hear it. Because with some other bands, you would hear that, and somebody, like Petra or something, you'd be like, oh yeah, I hear it now.
Yeah.
Right.
With this band, it's like, yeah, I don't really hear it. Okay. I mean, I guess if I analyze the lyrics, maybe, but.
So one thing I want to mention, because there has been, I guess, debate over the years about whether this is a concept album or not. I can tell you emphatically from an interview that I saw, no. Doug Pinnick said, I like to spew things and be uncomfortable after I've said it. Gretchen is not a concept album, but it sounds like it. It's actually the opposite of a concept album. I don't know what that means. The opposite of a so there's no concept, I guess. He said, when King's X does a record, we don't know what it's going to be like until we put it together. We listen and say, people will think this is a concept album. And then we laugh. The name of the band, the name Gretchen Goes to Nebraska, actually was come up by one of their roadies. They were just like loading gear or something, and they were all throwing out like ridiculous album titles for fun. And then they go, oh, that's a good one, actually. And they kept it in the back of their minds. And then like when they named the album, they told him like, we're naming the album. And he was like, I said that? Didn't even remember. So there's no concept album going on here, straight from the band. And they reject that. So if you think this is a concept album, I guess because there's a whole thing written in the liner notes. I don't have the liner notes, but there's like a story, I guess, that's written in here. Do you have that, Chip? Can you confirm with your physical media that there's some sort of a tale being told in the liner notes?
No, it's just the lyrics, at least on the cassette.
Oh, okay. Well,
it looked like a story.
Oh yeah.
Those are just the lyrics.
Oh, okay. Those are fun lyrics to read. That's a great layout. What are you supposed to do with that? I don't know. Let's get into the record. Oh no, wait a minute. We have comments. Sorry. I got to read some comments here.
Yeah.
Sorry, I apologize to people on Patreon. I almost left you behind. Scott Holgram said, "Oh, I still really like Ellie Guns and King's X here, but I want an excuse to hear more Wasp." Whitney Biller said, "King's X, Gretchen is so original. It has always been one of my favorites." Jeremy Amend said, "Every King's X album from 98 or from 89 to 93 needs to be dug out, if not more." We see what you did with the Doug there. Phil Hampton, another one of my all-time top 10 albums. King's X it is. Joe Royland, I love all these, but I'm pretty sure King's X will win it, so might as well see that through. Again, we're seeing the backing for King's X here. Kyle Bittner said, going with Wasp, too good not to. There's a live version out there on YouTube where he calls the crowd a bunch of rivet heads. There's a live version of Animal on YouTube that's amazing, if not overly PC. Darren Svensson said this is a tough choice. Of all these have merit, but going with Wasp simply because it's Wasp, damn it. You said poor kicks, Chip, which was funny.
Yeah.
To which Patrick Testa responded, yeah, I mean, come on, 3 metal classics versus 1 pop metal obscurity that deserves a DMO. Only thing worse would have been if the pool were 6 and included Screaming for Vengeance or Power Slave. I'll have to learn what those are because I'm not sure what those are in reference to. But Richard Waterman said, LA Guns for me, not as good as Cocked and Loaded, but still a fine slice of sunset, strip, sleaze, glam, hard rock. I can never get into King's X because of the vocals. Just never liked Doug Pinnick's voice.
What?
Well, that's interesting.
Blasphemy.
So just for fun, I was reading the Amazon reviews. People had bought this album, and most people gave it, whatever the 5 stars, whatever the most stars is. But the people that did not give it the 2s and 3s, which there were very few of, but the criticisms were all about the vocals. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Eric Peterson, in response, said maybe an episode on 80s King's X will help you find the elements of King's X that you do like, or at least highlight why others do like them. I hope that we do some highlighting of what works and what doesn't work. Whitney Bueller said, happy to see King's X has won the tourney. Gretchen is their best and really deserves a breakdown by the DMO Big Shots. Are we Big Shots? Are we? Billy Joel's going to come in here and call us Big Shots. Let's get into it. Let's talk about Gretchen Goes to Nebraska by King's X. Jay, tell me one thing that works for this record for you.
Well, we talked about Badlands recently, and I think they're a good example of, we stressed about, or at least I stressed about the performance aspect of that record and how unique the sound is and special it is because of the combination of, the 4 individual people. Not only does King's X sound unique as a collective, but as you break down them individually, they sound unique. Like Ty Tabor's guitar tone is his guitar tone. Like he plays a clean guitar part, and I know immediately it's him based on the chords he chooses, but also like just what his guitar sounds like. How many bass players can you say, it's them playing bass just based on the tone? I mean, Doug has got a signature tone. It's bitey. It's got a little, but it's also got a lot of low end, just the way he plays. And then the vocals are unique. You've got 2 singers here. I mean, Doug does the majority of the lead vocals. So he's got, this deep, soulful voice that can also get very powerful and sort of more on the straight up rock end. And then you've got Ty, who's got kind of a softer, more dreamy voice. And then they deliver these harmonies that don't sound like anybody else. So collectively, individually their voices are unique, but then when they put them together, it's like this whole other thing. So I would just really enjoy listening to this record. It's a little early in their formation. Second record, they're starting to get their feet. You're hearing them individually. You're hearing the classic King's X sound. They're got some great songs on here as well. Over My Head and a couple others are also cool because they're really leaning into like their gospel, or there's a little bit of funk stuff going on in this record, which you don't hear a ton of later on in their career.
Can't you hear it? I hear it, don't you hear it? Listen, it's all around me. It's everywhere. Oh.
There's some soul stuff here and there on this record that you don't necessarily hear as much later on. So I kind of liked just being able to hear that classic King's X sound, but then also start to pull it apart into the individuals on this record. And I really also respected, this is a beautifully produced album. It's got obviously some overdubs and stuff, but it's also pretty honest in terms of them, how they would play together as a three piece. If you notice in I think all of the guitar solos on this record, there is no rhythm guitar. That's very rare on an album even Badlands we just reviewed, right? All of those solo sections have another rhythm guitar in it. Now, when you see Badlands live, there's not going to be a rhythm guitar there. I'm sure it sounds great, but when you're in the studio, you're like, hey, who's going to know? We want to sound big. Like, they don't do that on this album. And it's testament to like Doug's playing and his tone again, that you don't miss it. Like, when he goes to do the solos, I'm not thinking, oh, this got super like, hollow sounding and thin. It sounds great. And that's, like I said, not only Doug, but also Ty's tone. He does some like doubling, which sounds like more of an effect doubling thing as opposed to like multi-tracking his solos and stuff. So it's just one little example of, even in those moments where on an album you might indulge and like go ahead and just, throw another track on, they make it sound full, or they're so committed to like the format, who they are, and exploiting their individual abilities in order to make this all work, which I think is really unique. I think especially for the genre that we're working with in this podcast series. So yeah, that's what I enjoy here. I'll let you guys get into more of probably the King's X signature sound, but that's what I sort of nerded out about as a fan of this band and going back to this moment in time with them. What worked for you, Chip?
One thing that we didn't mention in the history of the band is they worked with Sam Taylor, and Sam Taylor was a Houston guy who had worked with ZZ Top. I think he had maybe done some video producing for him, maybe not record producing, but his name was mentioned a lot in the press when King's X was putting out records. They had a falling out with him at one point, and I think that partnership broke up. But it feels to me like, just from a press perspective, he was always like the fourth member of the band, and so I think he probably helped them get their sound. I've heard some of that stuff before they were known as King's X, and it doesn't sound like this. I don't remember what it sounds like. I just remember like at the advent of YouTube and discovering that there was actually another band before King's X. I went and looked it up, and I was like, this doesn't sound like King's X to me. Sam Taylor also, after King's X, worked with and signed and whatever, he produced Galactic Cowboys, who you guys have reviewed.
Yep.
And that is a band that were close friends with King's X. They toured with him. That's the first time I saw King's X. Galactic Cowboys open for him. Very similar kind of sound. Over My Head is just, it was the hit, right? It was on MTV, and it just it's so catchy. The music, I hear music. Like, before we did this podcast, my wife is not a big fan of this genre of music, any of the stuff that we cover here. And I told her that we were going to talk about it, and she's like, I saw them a few times at the Newport, and I'm like, so do you know any of their songs? And she's like, I know that one, that Music, I Hear Music song. So it even appealed to my wife 30 years ago or 30 plus years ago, before I knew her. So it wasn't even my influence. So it's going to be a recurring theme, I think, on most these 80s podcasts. This was a cassette era for me. So going back and listening, I know the front side A really well. Like every song on this, when I listened to it again to prepare for this episode, it was like, I may not recognize the title, but as soon as the music started, I'm like, oh, yep, I know this one. And then when I flipped to the side two, when I listened to the second half of the album on Spotify, what would have been side B was not as familiar. I knew all the songs, but I'm like, as a 16, this came out in 89, so I was an 18-year-old kid. This is a long album, right? And so I didn't listen. I wasn't in my car for an hour at a time. So I would the 20-minute drive, I'd hear the first side, hit rewind because I liked it. So anyway, I don't remember at the time if I love these songs, but Summerland has been in my head for the last 15 years, like a song that I love that song so much. It's a little bit more laid back. It's not as in your face. There's a little bit of it that reminds me of something that you might hear on Warrant's Dog Eat Dog. Just not the chorus and everything, like the verses a little bit.
Summerland in my past, days before and it would last. I never thought there was anything else but you. The wind is getting cold. You're finally getting old.
The guitar solo is really kind of subtle. It's not like a flashy guitar solo. It's kind of, again, a little bit constrained, but I love that song. I've seen them once or twice in the last 10, 15 years, and they don't play that, and that's a disappointment.
Man.
When I've seen them, they don't. I feel like they don't tend to play a lot off this record. Maybe they played it so much in the early days that they're tired of it. The fact that Jeff Ament is a fan is not a surprise. I think that Alice in Chains, which Tim said we'd get to later, I think Alice in Chains, you guys may know this, that they started off as sort of a glam metal band, and then they evolved into what they are today. I have to believe that King's X were an influence on them. I mean, just the harmonies. I'm listening to some of these songs, and I'm like, man, the song "The Difference" in the Garden of St. Anne's on the Hill, that sounds like something off of Jar of Flies or Sap, one of the Alice in Chains acoustic albums. There's a little bit of like Zeppelin-y, Page, acoustic guitars.
Walk through a garden in the morning. I walked right into a chain. No words were spoken, just a feeling I cannot explain, but I can feel the difference. I can feel the difference.
Again, I love all of Warrant's catalog, and some of the stuff that like the albums they put out on CMC, which was kind of when it was a shadow of what Warrant used to be. But I think the song "I'll Never Be the Same" is another one that sounds to me like a Warrant, like it could have been a later period Warrant song. It's kind of got as I listened to it with kind of fresh ears, even today, I was trying to imagine Janie Lane singing that. And again, once you get to the chorus, that's not a Warrant chorus. But again, the verses reminded me of Warrant a little bit.
She stands in the way. She looks down to speak. Your eyes speak invitation to follow with the beat. She said, I'll never be the same. Struck my heart like lightning. I'll never be the same.
The guitars on "Fall on Me." I love the guitars on that song as it starts. Jay, you mentioned, I think, that Ty does some singing. He mainly the harmonies, but he sings lead on the Pleiades song, and you can definitely tell the difference. You can definitely tell that is not Doug singing. Let's see what else. "Send a Message." If you guys are familiar with the song, Tim's not, I'm sure. Jay, if you're familiar with the song "Black Flag," the "Send a Message" at the very beginning. like I could hear I could hear the genesis of Black Flag just in the guitars.
Mm.
Even all the way through to the end, the burning down, I was thinking to myself, like, that's how I want an album to end. It's like a 5.5 minute song. It's kind of long, but all the verses and choruses take place in the first 3 minutes, and the last 2 minutes are just it's the rhythm section just keeping it consistent, and then Ty's just doing some using some effects and stuff, and it just kind of it ends on a instrumental note, and just it's a great ending to an album. So yeah, that's what worked for me. I think there's a lot of good. It's not real. It's interesting. It's diverse, but it all sounds like King's X. And man, I don't know. Like I said, I didn't see them until probably 91. Probably 91 is when I saw them for the first time. And just Tim reading off the bands that they played with, like, I don't know. They were like a band out of place. Like, I don't know. Like, maybe they, like, opening for Rush would have been great.
Mm-hmm.
But all those other bands, like, they didn't fit in with most of the other bands that they toured with. But on the same hand, I have a really, and I think it's been in the press and it's in their Wikipedia. It's all over. I mean, so many. They're a musicians band, right? A lot of band members and musicians love this band, and it's because they are all just such great performers. So, I'm sure even like Anthrax was like, they might not sound like us, but we love them. And we want to put them in front of our audience because if they like good music, they'll like these guys too.
Mm-hmm.
So, Mr. Tim, who is not that familiar with this band, what do you think?
Well, it took me a couple of listens to sort of like figure out what was going on because, like I said, I didn't really connect with Ear Candy when we reviewed it, and I've never spent any time with the band. So I had to go into this basically brand new. And right out of the gate, on Out of the Silent Planet, you get those harmonies that are so Alice in Chains-esque, which made me go, huh, okay. And then I just typed in Alice in Chains King's X. And of course, a bunch of things came up about how Lane Staley and Jerry Cantrell were huge huge King's X fan. Like at one point they played a show and Lane Staley was like chasing Doug Pinnick down the street, trying to get to talk to him and stuff like, and so you figure like that's 1989. And then the next year, the first Alice in Chains album comes out. And before this, Alice in Chains wasn't really what we think of as Alice in Chains. They were Alice in Chains and like Guns N' Roses. They were like a glam band essentially. And so that one right there, I was like, huh, that's interesting. It's this combination of, it's almost got a like a Zeppelin-esque feel, but then you have those Alice in Chain harmonies, which I've learned are now our fourths and fifths if you are a music nerd. And that is a really unique thing to do that because it requires a lot of control with your voice. And a lot of people can't, like, most of the time when you hear a harmony, it's a third. That's like the traditional harmony. So the fact that, and not just doing fourths, but like matching the raises when they go up, which is again really hard. You have to really practice that and nail that.
Mountains look in glory, coming into view. Father speaks, son becomes the story, essence of all truth. Eyes are what cannot be seen. She spoke to me. Take what you learn, set free. See what you please.
The other thing that I found really interesting, and this is something that comes up, is how untraditional their arrangements are and how untraditional even just Ty Tabor's guitar playing is. And I wanted to show you guys an example. because it was blowing my mind when I heard it. And it doesn't, like, when you hear it, you go, oh, okay, that's a cool riff. And then I went, wait a minute, what is that chord that he's playing? So in Over My Head, it's this great riff. It starts out with it's a D to an E. Can you hear that? D to an E?
Yep.
Okay. Pretty normal, right? So then the next part of the riff is C, D, E. That's the weird part, because those notes are all next to each other. C, D, E, when you're talking about in like the wheel of notes. Normally, when you hear a progression, they're not right next to each other. That's how you get the 1-4-5 or the 1-6-4-5. So that to me like set something off my ear where I went, well, that doesn't sound normal. So you already get that weird part where you get you're getting these notes butting up against each other and it's creating tension. So then the really weird part is after you get the opening riff, which is, then he goes back and there's this little run. Then he throws in this chord at the end. And this is where I was like losing my mind. That is a hyper complex chord. That is a C7 with a flat 9 or a sharp 9. Sorry. It is a blues jazz chord. I mean, that is 100% blues jazz. What you got there is on the A string, you have a C. Then you have on the third string, you have an E. Then you have a B flat on the fourth string. And then you have a D flat or a D sharp on the fourth fret of the fifth string. So I had Katie play that on piano, and she was like, "This is so messed up. This is such a weird chord. Like that chord doesn't exist for piano players. That is a pure jazz. Like that's a funk chord. That's a jazz funk chord. And to hear him incorporate that into a rock riff was like mind blowing to me. I was like, how is that? Where do you even think to come up with that?" And I'm guessing it's because, when I was listening to this, obviously you're hearing, the progressive elements, which remind you of like a tiny bit of Rush. There's even some like King Crimson in some of this. Like I'm not super familiar with King Crimson, but I know a little bit here and there. And I was like, these are some really weird chords. And I think that is what like finally like locked the album in for me, was they're taking a song like Over My Head, which is super catchy. It's a clap along essentially. And yet you're doing something totally unexpected with that chord progression. And he brings that chord back for the verse. So you got this, and then he brings it back for the verse part. He goes, that's like Larry Carlton. that is pure jazz right there. That I don't get it. It's actually a weird thing to actually have to finger too, because you've got your pinky in an odd spot with it where you're trying to like hold it down on the one fret up above the rest of the chords. If you had just stuck to the three fingers, but you don't get that fullness of get that little extra ringing. So anyway, that to me, when I hear something like that, and then I hear something like those stacked fourth and fifth vocal harmonies, even though I am not a music nerd in that way, I can't read music, but I can understand it when people talk about it. And I went down a rabbit hole of watching videos about harmonizing fourths and fifths on YouTube because I was like so obsessed with trying to figure out what the hell was going on. And then you hear that throughout the record, not necessarily in the same way, but just hearing all of the really interesting harmonies that they produce between the two of them, and the way that the band, like you mentioned to Jay, it's a 3-piece. They don't do a ton of overdubbing from what I can hear in terms of like adding layers and layers of guitar. You mentioned like the guitar drops out when there's a solo, so you're not getting a second rhythm guitar. It was a really fun listen, and it made King's X click for me. Like I went, oh, okay, now I get it. Now I understand why people love this band. So that's what worked for me, was unlocking the King's X secret sauce.
For the formula.
Which is a weird formula.
And it's those types of chords too. It speaks to the the precision and the tone choice and the overall sound of the band. Because if those kinds of chords can sound like crap if you don't finger them correctly, hit them right with your right hand, and then have the right guitar tone. They just sound like what? Like either you won't hear some of the notes or it'll just sound like overtone noise.
Yes.
But this album is very sharp sounding. It's very percussive. It's very precise. Um, Almost to the point like where the heavy sections, and they do a lot with like accents and time signatures too. Some of the heavier sections, where a song might even be mellow, and it'll go to a section where there's this riff that's like pretty damn heavy. I was kind of surprised. Like I almost felt like when we going into this, it's like, well, is this going to be like fit, 80s metal? I know we thought it was metal at the time, but is it still going to feel like metal? I mean, there's some legit heavy riffs in this to the point where I'm listening to some of the stuff and don't believe it. And I'm like, this kind of sounds like you can imagine like Pantera, like really turning this up to 11 and kind of seeing where that's coming from. This groove oriented, like weird time signature or weird time feel, very rhythmic, minor and weird, minor overtones. You can kind of hear where some of those bands that, throughout the early 90s start to head in terms of metal. You can kind of hear it on this record. Just, bursts of it here and there. It's not like the kind of, album where every song is going to blow your hair back, but there's definitely like outros or riff sections or choruses or verses that, there's some pretty heavy riffs on here.
Yeah, the outro to I'll Never Be the Same, that like halftime like groove is so tasty. It's like you were just locked into that groove, and it sounds like a cross between like Extreme and Shudder to Think's X French T-shirt. Like it's got this crazy riff that I feel like the bass and the guitar are not always playing the same thing, but they always land at the same place. So the riffs create this interesting like up and down crisscrossing thing going on. Again, I know it's their second album, but they've been together for 10 years, I guess, at this point. So it makes sense that they can come up with this sort of craziness and lock it in so tightly, because that is a lot of stuff on here is really hard to do with a 3-piece. It's just and to keep it full but not chaotic. It's pretty crazy and mind-blowing in a lot of respects.
For sure.
Do you know what you mentioned about them being together for 10 years prior to like this stuff coming out? Again, I didn't realize this necessarily at the time, but like I know Doug now is 73 years old. Ty is 62, but Jerry's right between. Yep, Jerry's 66. So yeah, Doug had been doing this for a while when this when they started.
He's almost as old as Mick Jagger. Think about that. And Mick Jagger was performing in the late 50s, 60s.
So he was born in 1950, which means he would have been 50 in 89. He would have been 39 years old.
Wow.
When this record came out. That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's great. 39 years old.
Yeah.
Like if we had known that at the time, that would have been,
Wonder if he had to lie about his age ever at that point. I mean, because he didn't look 39, but like you can imagine A&R people being like, "What?
You mean like the drummer to Crazy Town
who's 39?" Yeah, that's wild. I mean, you can hear it though. Like, I mean, you can hear it in the sophistication and the craft for sure,
and his voice too.
Yeah,
like you can, he has such a soulful voice, and I know he has a background in like gospel singing, and you can hear that when he sings. It is, that was the other thing that I took notice of, was how expressive he is as a vocalist. And it's not showy in like the 80s front man, trying to be David Lee Roth type of thing. It is much more grounded. in terms of the soulfulness. That's the word I just keep coming back to, because it has a different texture than most other vocalists of the time. So I have a hard time comparing it to anybody.
So on the soulful side, what were your guys' thoughts on Everybody Knows a Little Bit of Something? It would make me wonder, like, I could hear this band either influencing or having an alternate history where they go more in this like Red Hot Chili Peppers, Fishbone kind of direction. Like even the bass playing on that song is a little different. Like you can hear it, he's maybe slapping or something, like he's playing like different than he typically does. And it's got a little bit more of like a funk soul groove to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'd be interesting. I don't know that I would like it as much if it was a whole record of funk,
Yeah,
or if they followed it up with so much of that. I don't
and I
know.
wonder if like how influential something like that was, because you can also hear like parts of it sound a little bit like Faith No More. Like, you know what I mean? It's like
Mhm.
in that space of that like alternative early late '80s kind of funk soul, you know, curious
And
scene.
Jim Martin from Faith No More at the time was a big fan of this record.
Oh, okay.
So that totally makes sense. Like that's a band that's like on the edge of things, and
Mm-hmm.
I could totally see King's X and Faith No More and maybe like Living Color and some of these bands touring together that make much more sense than Billy Squire and some
Mm-hmm.
of the other bands that we mentioned.
They
Like
were a weird band. They're a weird band, right? And that, like in '89, a lot of the stuff well, I don't know if we're a lot of stuff we're going to talk about, but '89 was the Hair and the
Mm-hmm.
and like even like alternative metal, the Saigon Kicks and the Warrior Souls and the bands that would come just a few years later weren't even around yet, right? And
Mhm.
King's X was almost predated the alternative, and like they're Jay, like you said, like there's times where they're heavy. They're not really a metal band, but like what other category? There wasn't another good category. Like I know that they get talked about a lot on like progressive rock message
Mm-hmm.
boards, and they're maybe I
Yep.
don't know. You know what else is super interesting to me is what I was thinking about is no slight to the members and their projects. But I think when you put the three of them together, there's some sort of magic. The three of them as solo artists have put out some really great material, but I mean, I think I might own one. I think I have that Jelly Jam CD that Ty Tabor, and I interviewed Jerry probably 7, 8 years ago. King's X was coming to the Alrosa Villa in Columbus, so it's been at least 7-ish years.
Mhm.
And when I put in the request, I got to interview Jerry, the drummer, and he put out a solo record. And so like I wanted to be prepared, to talk about his solo record too. And it sounds like King's X.
God bless America. May the children see that what they feel is what they feel. So can't come with me, but she'll never go away. She saw this picture.
But like I said, these guys have all put out stuff. But the success they've had has been as a band. So it's sort
Yeah.
of like you got to get the three of them together. Even Doug played on that record with he's done a couple records with George Lynch at KXM,
Mm-hmm.
and that's pretty good stuff too. And the drummers like that Ray Luzier from
Yeah.
Korn and
Korn,
George
yeah.
Lynch and Doug Pinnick. That's like a super group. But those, I mean, I can't tell you a single song off those. Right, I've listened to them and they're
Mm-hmm.
good, but the King's X had the magic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The KXM stuff, it sounds like when I hear it, I'm like, oh, that sounds kind of cool. But yeah, it doesn't stick with you in the same way. I mean, the vocals on King's X are also just such a huge part. I don't know if we can overstate that enough. Just having, you know, Doug's incredible voice, but then to be able to do like really good three-part harmonies. I mean, these are like Beatles quality, Beach Boys quality three-part harmonies. Um, so that is a very special ingredient to be able to put on your records that when you do a solo record, you're not going to necessarily have. But I'm with you. Like, I'm a fan of some of Ty's solo stuff, and I think I like it when he diverges a little bit further from King's X a bit more and kind of goes more in like a experimental pop direction. But
I don't think I've heard this, but I just looked up one of the projects that Doug did. I'm looking to see if it's on Spotify because I really would like to hear it. He did a project with two of the guys from Trouble called Supershine. And
Okay.
Trouble, if you don't know Trouble, Trouble is definitely like worshipped at the altar of Black Sabbath. They're kind of a doom
Yeah.
gloom hard rock band from Chicago.
Hmm.
And Doug sang on, it looks like it's on Spotify.
What's
I'll
it
have to
called?
check it out. Supershine. I can't tell. It doesn't have like any bio information, but at the bottom it said fans also like Pound Hound, which is that a Doug side project?
I
And
believe so.
Grinder Blues, which is definitely a Doug side project. Jerry Gaskill. So it's got to be the same. It's got to be Supershine's got to be um,
Yeah.
the right band.
Now, do you know if at this time was he playing a 12-string bass? Because that's what he's kind of known for now.
I think he's always played that. Yeah. That's part, I think, what makes his tone so unique and likely why he can, play during a solo and you don't miss the guitar.
Yeah, I mean it's crazy. I can't imagine playing a 12-string bass. I have enough trouble with four. I don't need eight more strings. Is
Well,
there anything?
it's like a 12-string guitar where you're fretting two strings at once.
Yeah,
That's what
that's three
from
strings at once.
The guy from Cheap Trick plays.
Yeah, I don't understand. Their fingers must be enormous.
And Life, Sex, and Death, their bass player played, I think, the same type of bassist Doug plays.
Got it.
All right, I put myself on mute and I listened to the beginning of "Take Me Away" by Supershine. It totally sounds like the riff sound. It totally sounds like a Soundgarden song. I mean, like it's got a total Soundgarden riff at the beginning of the song.
They're not
Check it out.
outshine, they're super shine.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I can't wait to check out this album.
Take a ride with me if you don't care. Let me into your mind.
What, if anything, does not work for you on this record, Jay?
So I mentioned I'm a fan of Ty's stuff, and I like that you get these little palette cleansers on their album, where he steps in and sings and the vibe changes a little bit and his material is a little different. But on this record, I found his material to be a little subpar. I think it sounds beautiful, like Pallades and the Burning Down. I think those sound really cool. They're just, I like his like more sort of Beatles side pop sensibilities in terms of his writing. I think is it the difference? Yeah, the difference is probably the one I would keep on the record just as like a mid-album break. And I might cut either Pallades or The Burning Down, and just trim the album up a little bit. I think at 52 minutes, it's just a little long. I'd love to have it be in the closer to that 40 range. I found myself just more gravitating, like I said, towards I think the stuff that showed a little bit more of that funk soul side of them, and then you in the songs that you get like you mentioned, Chip, the preview, that Black Flag sound with that super sharp, heavy groove feel. That's the material on this record that I was gravitating to most, and not all the Thai stuff. Anything that work for you, Chip?
Not really. I mean, I think, and maybe it comes with age, and maybe it's a short attention span. Like you just mentioned, it's a little bit long. I'm not sure. I don't know that I would cut. I don't know. I can't think of a song that I would cut.
Yeah.
But it does feel like a long record, and yeah, it's almost an hour's worth of music, which is also interesting in the fact because this was like they recorded like what did they have, like an album? Out of the Silent Planet came out in '88. Gretchen Goes to Nebraska came out in '89. Faith, Hope, and Love or King's X came out, and like they were like almost like 3 years in a row.
Mhm.
So I mean they were writing a ton of songs. Maybe that's what happens when you're in your late 30s and you're sort of just you're like time's ticking. I got to get everything out there.
Yeah.
You would think that that if you make an album every year that you'd only have enough material for 8 or 9 songs, but yeah. But yeah, I think the length, but it's not a huge complaint. I there's no song that I would cut. So yeah,
Yeah, the
Tim?
second half I would agree too was less familiar to me. Like
Yeah,
the first half of the album, I was like, oh yeah, I remember all these songs, and then I got to the second half, and I was like, I don't know that I remember this song.
cassette generation.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. As far as stuff that didn't work for me, sorry to say that Mr. Tabor's songs were the weak link on the record. Similar to what you guys said, I didn't love the last track, burning down. It just kind of meanders for quite a long time. And I don't feel like his voice is as interesting. It's great when they're harmonizing or playing off of each other. It's not as interesting to me when he's in charge of the whole song, whether it's on the difference or Pleiades. I'd probably lose Pleiades and the burning down and keep the difference. I think that's a nice little track in the middle of the record. That's still 10 strong tracks. But yeah, it does feel like it goes on a little bit longer. And the back half to me is not as strong as the first half of the record. So, but that's really my only complaint. I was really taken with this record. So
I don't know, I mentioned this in one of the previous episodes about I know that setlist.fm is not the be all end all. It's only as good as the people who are contributing to it.
mm-hmm.
And who still has setlist from 1991. So, a lot of stuff is missed, but as long as people have been inputting stuff into setlist FM for King's X, the back half of the record is not, over my head in setlist FM has been played 307 times. Summerland 188 times. Some of the back half of the record don't believe it. According to setlist FM, it's only two times that anybody, the difference 6 times, I'll never be the same 6 times, send a message 9 times, out of the planet 13, burning down 14, fall on me 36, mission 53, everybody knows a little bit of something 87, Pleiades 91, Summerland 188, over my head 307. So like the second half of that record, at least as far as I guess I feel like setlist is probably a more recent thing. So in more recent times, they're not playing the songs off the second half of this record. They're playing the hits. And even like I mentioned, Summerland, I saw them, I went to that show. I was like, if I can just hear Summerland, I'm going to walk out of here. That's the only song I want to hear. And they didn't play it when I saw them. And they played it like in the 2010s, 2012, 14-ish time period or whatever. But their more recent tours, they haven't played it very often in the last 10 years.
I figured that would be a staple. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about our overall ratings for this record, gentlemen, as we conclude this review for our 80s metal folks. Where do you guys land on Gretchen Goes to Nebraska by King's X? Is it a worthy album, a better EP, or a decent single? Jay, where do you land?
Worthy album. Maybe it could be trimmed up here or there, but yeah, I think this is a classic King's X sound and great sounding album. I like the production a lot. A couple killer tunes on here, and ahead of its time. Where'd you land, Chip?
Chip is muted, so we're not hearing him.
Sorry, but I can't. I'm losing it. I can't remember the last album we did, but I remember.
Badlands.
Badlands. Yeah. Going into this again, a little critically saying, I loved it when it came out, but like with time, do I still love it? Like, is it really a worthy album? And I went into it in the last week or two since this one came up as one we were going to do, trying to be like, it's going to be a better EP. There's 4 songs I really love, but then again, I started going down my list. Check mark, check mark, check mark, check mark. I'm like, I really wanted to I really want to come out and just say better EP just to be a little bit different. But yeah, worthy album. I mean, there was nothing that I didn't check. So worthy album.
Yeah, this is one that is going to end up in a playlist somewhere. At least half of these songs are, because they're really, really cool rock songs, just full of tasty riffs and great harmonies. And it's not something that, if you're looking for the immediacy of an Alice in Chains, like a big hook, the way that they have, you're not going to get that here. These are a little headier, I guess I'd say. But it finds the right balance between, it's not overly progressive. Like it's like the space between Dream Theater and Alice in Chains. Like that's where I would say it sits. Like it's got progressive elements, but then it's just got some straight up like rock, quote unquote, grunge elements because those guys borrowed from them.
Right. So I think that Jeff Ament comment makes more sense as we get to the end of this episode, because if you consider like everybody's going to have a different, like, what's the quintessential grunge band? So for you, if the quintessential grunge band is Alice in Chains, well then King's X, you have to give them credit for partially how Alice in Chains came to be.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing you were saying about I think both you and Chip mentioned a little bit of like the prog tendencies on the album, or is it prog or not prog? I think what's so interesting is when you did that guitar demo, you did Over My Head. That's a pretty straightforward song. It starts with the hook. It's not overly complicated to my ears. It's not, you can bob your head to it. You get into it right away. It's a little long. It's close to 5 minutes, but that's mostly because there's a kind of a jam out section with, the crowd. But when you broke it down and actually played the chords, like my reaction was like, what? And then as I'm listening to the song, I'm like, oh my God, you're right. Those chords are so weird. Like, how do you make those weird chords like that sound so, I don't know, like easy to understand and digestible? Because normally if you heard those chords, you'd be like, well, this is weird. Like, this is a proggy album, but it doesn't, I don't know. They present it in a way that's just simple and easy to understand, which is kind of wild.
Yeah. And that song is not structured in a normal way. Like the bouncing between the sections, there's no really like well-defined chorus or verse to that song. It's a lot of like A and B and A and B, but then he changes the melodies for the different sections as he's going through. So it's super catchy and memorable, but in a way that is hard to define why. So, I think that's what makes them interesting.
You had never heard that song before?
No.
Wow. Nice.
Achievement unlocked.
I love it.
So
I got another. So I think both of you may have a different take on this. It's well documented on previous Dig Me Out episodes that my world changed when I saw Nirvana, and I sort of dropped out of any of this kind of music. Other Warrant's the only one I stuck with, but all the other things, even like Motley Crue '94, everything I dropped out of. The first 4 King's X albums, The Silent Planet, Gretchen Goes to Nebraska, Faith, Hope, Love, and the self-titled are all in my collection. I know you guys said you reviewed Ear Candy or Dogman or one of those two.
Ear Candy, yeah.
I don't know that I've ever listened. I never went back to listen to those. Like the first 4 are the only ones that I've really ever spent time with. Like I don't know anything past that. Jay, did you follow them? Have you stuck with them? And Tim, would you go back and listen to the full catalog at this point, or do you think you're going to stick with like just? Oh
no, I definitely want to go check out some of the other records as I have time. Reviewing records for this podcast, reviewing records for the regular DMO podcast, plus our aughts episodes keeps me busy. But yeah, when I can squeeze in some time to listen to some more King's X, I'm definitely going to do that.
I followed them heavy through Ear Candy. And I started to lose track. They got my perception of the catalog after Ear Candy is that they kept getting like heavier. Did
they lose some of the harmonies?
2000s? I think so. I'd have to go back.
Yeah.
That's the part of the catalog I don't know very well. Like I've sampled some of those records and like I don't hear it. I love the 2014 album, 15 XV. That's great. I think I was so excited when they were going to make a new record because I was hoping they would like stay in that vein. It's kind of classic, but it's also just more song based. So I lost track of them for probably a decade, then they picked up with them again. And so I'm with you. I'm like heavy on the first 4. And then I also like Dogman and King's Ear Candy and then XV.
I mean, they put out 13 records. That's a lot.
Yeah.
That is a lot.
All those ones that in the 2000s, I lost track.
Yeah, me too.
I think the production on some of those is a little weird. I mean, I'm interested in the Michael Wagner one to hear what that sounds like because I usually like his production. I need to check that one out.
Wait, why is XV their 12th album? Shouldn't it be their 15th album? Isn't XV 15?
I think they're counting like live albums.
Oh, okay.
There's a couple live albums in there.
Because I got a complaint if that's the fact.
And a greatest hits too. I think somewhere in there too.
Okay. Well,
I'm guessing. when I did the math, I was like, oh yeah, I could see if you counted this live album and then this, okay, that would be 15.
I was looking at my MP3s that from downloading during the LimeWire,
Yep.
torrenting days. I actually have the best of King's X. I don't know that I've ever listened to it.
There you go.
So this does say, Wikipedia says it's their 15th album, counting live albums and compilations.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. They snuck it in with the asterisk there. Not studio albums, just albums in general.
I guess that came out in 2008. Jeez. Okay.
Yeah.
I thought it was 14. Man, that decade was a blur for me.
To be fair, it was a blur for a lot of us. It just kind of flew by. Well, we need to thank Eric Peterson because he's the one who suggested this record. And if you want to be like Eric, you can go to digmeoutpodcast.com and you can suggest records for either the 80s metal podcast or the 90s rock podcast. I know that because just this week I submitted like a dozen records and then Jay told me to stop. So I did.
I just said, calm down, bro.
Well, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to throw a bunch out there because I know the hopper's getting low. And, there were some 80s metal ones that I thought would make interesting picks. So we'll see if they make it into some future polls or when they do. Maybe I'll win again. I won the Supergrass one, so maybe I'll win an 80s metal one as well. But if you want to go suggest a record, digmeoutpodcast.com. That's where you go. You can also go to the DMO Union, DMOunion.com or digmeoutunion.com to join the Metal Union to vote in the polls like this one and in our 90s rock polls and in our album polls where we vote where the album better EP and decent single. You also get access to the Discord where our very in-depth sponge discussions happen. I know people, the spongites out there are all over. And there were some other discussions that were happening this week. I don't remember what all of them were, but there was some interesting stuff happening.
Some hot takes on the new Motley Crue.
Oh yeah, the new quote unquote Motley Crue song.
Yes.
That I'm not sure that they didn't use AI to write that for them. It's entirely possible, knowing Nikki Sixx. Nikki Sixx is like a really kind of annoying version of Gene Simmons, which seems impossible because Gene Simmons is already annoying, but he seems like he's going for the even more annoying version of that with we're retiring and we're going to sign a piece of paper that says we're never going to come back. And then we're just going to ignore that. And everything is just to mess with people. And
the new Sebastian Bach single is awesome though.
Yes.
If you haven't listened to that.
People have been talking about that as well in the Discord and really enjoying the Sebastian Bach. So, and Chip, you just spoke with him, right?
I did. And I posted it somewhere, Twitter or X. I think I posted it a bunch of different places trying to get it out there. But when I interviewed him, I told him that was like my favorite song and that it sounded like there's like, if you haven't heard it yet, it starts off like one of the Skid Row ballads, sort of a wasted time. He kind of eases in, kind of quiet. And then it hits this point where these like chugging Ozzy guitars and like he gets through the soft, gentle part and then it gets like really heavy. And I said it reminded me of Ozzy. And in the interview, there's this pause and he says, did my record company tell you to talk about that song? And I'm like, oh crap, I'm in trouble. Like it felt like he was about to say something like that I did something wrong. And I'm like, no. And he's like, that's going to be the next single. He's like, I knew, like, I love that. Like he loves that song. And he was very happy that I picked up on that should be a single and it's a good song. So I was excited about that.
Chip is directing the record companies now of what singles to release.
Oh
He
man,
should be. You should be get Rick Rubin out of there. Let's get Chip in running some labels.
I've had a week, man. Because you guys are doing that Super Chunk episode coming up. I caught on to I don't know if the reason you're doing it is because it was the 30th anniversary, but it was the 30th anniversary.
Somebody picked it, but because of it's the 30th anniversary, yeah.
Yeah, and I've seen Superchunk live a few times, and they don't tend to play that album a whole lot. And so I tweeted and I said, Superchunk, considering the 30th anniversary, you guys should go out and play this album start to finish. And oh yeah, by the way, a Columbus date would be great. Please and thank you. And then 3 days later, the press release came out that said Superchunk celebrating Foolish by playing a lot of the album on an upcoming tour. And the first tour date, Columbus, Ohio.
Boom.
Chip working his
I don't know.
magic. He's got that magic cauldron where
You're manifesting your own reality, man.
Yeah.
Seriously.
I got some other stuff that we'll talk about later this year. But another manifesting thing.
Are you reuniting Uncle Tupelo for me? Is that happening?
No, I am. I'll be very vague. I am.
You don't have to say if you want.
No. There's going to be a special guest at a pretty big concert. Yeah, that's all I can say.
So you're saying that Taylor Swift is coming to Rock on the Range. That's what you're saying.
No, I've arranged for a special guest appearance by somebody that has been talked about on the 90s podcast and who's going to be playing a song from that band's catalog with a current band that is playing 5,000 to 10,000 seaters. And that's all I'm going to say.
Okay. So Taylor Swift will be joining Dirty Honey.
When do we get our next clue?
Yeah. Can you parse this out over like several months with little clues here and there? Like just letters, just like a crazy serial killer taping letters together. Just like drop a letter every once in a while. We have to figure out what the code is.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't know if it's like, I don't know what the special guest or the artist, I don't know if they're trying to keep it quiet. So here's what I'll say. All will be revealed this summer. I'll either I'll at least give you a recap of what happened for sure.
Okay. Well, thank you for the vague booking there, as they say. And let me wrap up this show by saying you can join us at Patreon at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. You can join our Substack newsletter, which every week we give you a calendar of 80s, 90s, and aughts relevant music releases, documentaries, books, etc., with reviews, as well as history of the bands for our polls. Lastly, Apple Podcasts is where you go to leave positive feedback for this show. So for Jay and Chip, I'm Tim, and we'll be back next time with another episode of Dig Me Out 80s Metal.